Shalom Uvrocha. We are in Hilchot Avodah Zarah v'Chokot HaGoyim in Mishneh Torah Rambam, Perek Gimel, Halacha Yod v'Halacha Hey, which you should now be able to see. Ha'oved Avodah Zarah kedalka. Wa'afilu asa derech bizayon hayav. If a person worships any form of Avodah Zarah in the normal manner for that type of Avodah Zarah, he's hayav, even if it is derech bizayon. כיצד? הפוער עצמו לפעור כדי לבזותו. If a person defecated in front of an idol of pa'or, which is the avodah of this particular avodah zarah, he was thinking perhaps כדי לבזותו, but that is the way of worshipping this avodah zarah. Or another example, זרק אבן למרקוליס או מרקוליוס כדי לבזותו, הואיל ועבודתו בכך, that is the way of this avodah zarah, to throw a stone at it. הואיל ועבודתו בכך, חייב ומביא קורבן על שכבתו. So he is hayav. If he did it mezid, he's hayav mitha, and if it was b'shocher, he's hayav a korban. I will just note that the Muslims who claim to be so far removed from Avodah Zarah have such a practice at Makkah, where they throw stones at something or other. So we see that some ancient forms of Avodah Zarah are retained by these people. We continue. העובד עבודה זרה מאהבה. כגון שחשק בצורה זו מפני מלאכתה, שהייתה נאה ביותר. A person who worshipped a certain idol, which is Avodah Zarah, but he worshipped it, he bowed down to it because it's very beautifully produced. The workmanship is outstanding. Or she'avada mi'irathola shema tare'alo, or a person who worshipped it because he's afeared that if he does not do so, this Avodah Zarah will harm him in some way. As those who worship it imagine. If his intention was to accept it upon himself as a divinity, he's hayav saqila. In other words, ahava or yirah alone, whilst asur is not the usual form of avodah, of worship, and a person is patur. Halacha Yod Beth on the screen in front of us. Hamegapef avodah zarah. The gapef is to hug, to cling to. Or he who kisses such an item, any type of idol or other image. Mechabed is to sweep, to clean the floor, and marbis is to sprinkle water on the earthen floor in order to prevent it becoming dusty. Marhisla hasach, or he who washes, cleans it, or anoints it with oil. Malbish, or dresses it. V'chol ha'kayotze b'divrei kavod ha'elu over b'lo ta'aseh, even though it's not the actual avodah itself. But it is, these are various activities which indicate some type of acceptance and imply deference and respect towards this article of Avodah Zarah. Such a person is over b'lo ta'aseh, shneimar b'lo ta'ovdem. In other words, from this pasuk, the Torah talks about lo tishtahaweh, talks about lo ta'ovdem. Lo ta'ovdem means do not serve them in any way. Udvarim elu bichlal avodah zarah. And these things are part of avodah zarah because this is, of course, what the avodah zarah themselves do. They understand that you don't bow down to some dirty, unwashed, and disgusting idol that has not been cleaned in a long time. So this is an essential part of the avodah. And nevertheless, having said this, you are not a person is not flogged for any of these things. They're not mentioned explicitly in the Torah. And they are learnt from the pasuk of them, but they are not explicitly learnt in the Torah, from anything explicit in the Torah. Unless one of these actions is considered, in the case of a particular avodah zarah, the classic avodah of this item, and he did so with this intention, then he is hayav. But otherwise, he is patur from al-qiyot, even though he transgressed the mitzvot lo ta'aseh lo ta'ovdeh. Halacha yod gimel lo zayin. Yashav lo kos beraglo b'fnei avodah zarah. In other words, a person was walking by in the street and a thorn enters his foot. He had an open sandal, perhaps, and it came through the sandal, and he wishes to remove it. He should not do so when in front of this avodah zarah, of this idol. Lo yashoah v'yitalenu. You should not bow down and to reach down and remove it. Because it seems to an observer excuse me, it seems to an observer that he's bowing down to it. Similarly, if he was walking along and let's say there was a hole in his purse and coins fell out on the ground and happens to be in front of this idol, lo yashvah v'yitalem mipnei shenir'eh kimishtahava lo elo yeshev v'achar kach yitol. He, rather than bending down to pick them up as he normally would do, he should sit down on the ground and pick up the coins. So it will not appear that he is bowing down to this idol. Palsufoth hamekalahot ma'im b'fnei avodah zarah. We're talking about these were essentially taps for the purpose of drinking. Usually, these were common in the Roman world, and Chazal's, the period if we're talking about the period prior to the Mishnah, the period of the Mishnah, Chazal's direct experience of these things was merely in the Greco-Roman world. And we're familiar with these things. We're talking about graven images, but not an idol necessarily that stands alone, but it was an image that was chiseled out of stone, and it's on the wall, and from its and usually from its mouth, it was built in such a way that a pipe of water would emanate from its mouth, and water would, as it were, be a kind of fountain would result. And this was deliberately done in front of a form of Avodah Zarah, apparently for the direct and deliberate purpose of causing people, therefore, to place their mouth on this on the face of the mouth of this face, this graven image, as if they were kissing it. Because it looks exactly as that is what you are doing, when in fact you only mean to drink, but it also can be interpreted as an act of Avodah Zarah in some way. So that is a sur. يدرد الطيف העושה עבודה זרה לעצמו, אף על פי שלא עשה בידו ואף על פי שלא עבדה לוקה. A person who produces some kind of idol or image for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, he does it himself. אף על פי שלא עשה בידו ואף על פי שלא עבדה, and even though he hasn't yet had a chance to worship it, or he changed his mind perhaps, but he produced it with that intention. לוקה שנאמר לא תעשה לך פסל בכל תמונה. So in the Sefer HaDivrot we find this prohibition explicitly in the list of mitzvot at the beginning of Hilchot Avodah Zarah. This is mitzvah wow, שלא לעשות פסל לעצמו, and the next one, of course, is שלא לעשות פסל אפילו לאחרים. This is learned from לא תעשה לך פסל בכל תמונה, וכן העושה עבודה זרה בידו לאחרים, אפילו עשה אותה לגוי, לוקה. The goy is also a sur, not supposed to be worshipping Avodah Zarah. If you create for him such an image, you are guilty of participating in this action. שנאמר ואלוהים מסכה לא תעשו לכם. You must not create such images. לפיכך, therefore, העושה עבודה זרה בידו לעצמו לוקה שתיים. And thus, he who does so for himself, is chayav on two counts. There are many who say, it should be pointed out, that ordering such an image, an idol, from an artisan who produces it, the point being, of course, that a person is only chayav malkuyot if he did something which involves a ma'aseh, an action. So there are many who claim that the action of speaking to the thoref, to the artisan who produces this item, that is an action, and therefore he's also okay in that case. Although the Rambam does not say this explicitly here. All right, now everything we discussed till now has to do with suroth la'avodah zarah, idols, images, engravings, and we're talking about, as we're about to see, things which protrude, which are three-dimensional and are not flat, not a drawing. So, till now we were discussing such items that are intended for Avodah Zarah. But it's also possible to create all kinds of statues, idols, images for aesthetic purposes. No intention of Avodah Zarah. Now, today, the distinction between these two classes of idol or statue or image are quite obvious. But in the ancient world, it was not at all obvious what the intention was. Sometimes it was a multi-purpose item. It was deliberately both. So the halakha is as follows: for the purpose of beautifying, decorating one's house, etc. Even though it's not Avodah Zarah, it's just a very beautiful statue. שנאמר, לא תעשון איתי אלוהי כסף ואלוהי זהב. כלומר, צורות של הכסף ושל הזהב שהן לנוי, כדי שלא יטעו בהן הטועים וידמו שהן לעבודה. Because the distinction and these categories were not clear-cut and obvious, it was always very possible, not far-fetched at all, that an image, an idol produced for one purpose would be eventually used for the other purpose. And it is therefore a sword. So therefore, Jews do not have any such item in their home. When asur lasur lenoy ela surat ha'adam bilevad. But this only applies to a human form, not to the form of an animal. Shall we say some kind of statue or something of a horse or something like that. But a horse with a rider on it, with a man sitting on the horse, that is a sword. Why? Because, again, certainly in the time of Hazal, all the various statues and idols and images that were worshipped had human features, human face at least. Therefore, en sorim, one does not create any such form. Lo ba'is, v'lo b'sid, v'lo ba'evan. Surah Adam. One is not allowed to produce such an image of whatever material, not wood, plaster, stone. وهو شتهي الصورة بولتت كغون هالسيور وهالكيور شبتراكلين وخيل سبحين. We're talking about again items which are not two-dimensional and flat, but three-dimensional. It may be on a wall, but it protrudes from, extends from the wall outward. That is a sur. If it's just a drawing, it's not a sur. We'll see. With regards to the drawing, there's actually not haloketh, but we'll see. And if he did so, he's hayav malkuyot. Aval im hayat surah mushka'ath or mishuka'ath or surah shel samanim. If it was just a drawing, that's a surah shel samanim. In other words, paint, color of some type, and drawn on some background, or it's engraved into the stone, shall we say, but it does not protrude in any way. So it might be, for example, embroidered or woven into some kind of a piece of cloth, a tapestry, for example. Or it is some image drawn on some kind of a tablet or board. These are mutar because these were not worshipped as Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah was always Surah Boleteth.
Rav,
Yes.
to clarify, Surat Ha'adhan refers to any humanoid-like thing. So if you drew or if you carved an animal with a human face or something like that, like many ancient cultures used to worship, that would still fall under the Sisur, right?
So you're asking if this applies to, shall we say, the form of a goat with a human head. My understanding is that the answer is yes, that the face is the ikar. That is what I think we see from the Sugiyot. Here it's not so. Rambam doesn't go into this in great detail, but I think that's the answer. All right, so now this brings us to the question of a signet ring. Rings were used often as a form of identification or signing documents, etc. It had a seal on the ring, and this was common, and not just in ancient times, even till much more recent times. So Rambam says, "Taba'ath sheyesh aleh hotham shehul surat adam." It has a seal on it in the form of a man, and here I think you can medayek, I think, from this halakha, what we just said a moment ago, because usually on such rings you don't have a full image of a human being, just the face. And I'm saying this because we have many such examples that have survived down to the present day, and you can see these items in museums, and you can no doubt today find many photographs on the internet. And you see that we're almost exclusively talking about a human face, not necessarily a human body. So if you have such a ring, if it was protruding, asur lahaniha mutar lahtomba, you are not allowed to wear it, to keep it. And this, even though your intention may be only that it's just an ornament, it's just a piece of jewelry or something like that. So as we said before, we said in halakha Tetwell, so if it's bullet, even if it's only lenoi, it's asur, because it's a surat adam. Surah boletet asur lahaniha. Umutar lahtomba, but you're allowed to use it, take it in your hand and depress it onto, shall we say, some sealing wax in order to produce the impression, because what you produce is not protruding, but rather sunken into the wax. So therefore, asur hanifa umutar lahtomba, and if the other way around, if the image on the ring is such that it is engraved into the metal, it could also be another substance, but usually metal. Mutar lahaniha, it is you're allowed to wear it or to keep it because it is not bullet, does not protrude. But asur lahatamba, because by doing so you produce an image in the wax which will be protruding, which will be three-dimensional. Because it will result in that type of protruding three-dimensional image.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Is it possible to make the argument that some of these halachot are no longer applicable since the circumstances are different, and nowadays people understand very clearly that if somebody were to have let's say a little statue of a boy in their house, just as a for aesthetic reasons, that there's no intention whatsoever to worship that statue. Is it possible that this would not apply nowadays? And also, a second question is, would it be improper for Jews to go to museums where they do have all types of ancient engravings, which were Avodah Zarah, but now is being placed in the museum for educational purposes, so people could learn about what was?
In the first case, even though today generally such forms of worship are strange and also rare, first of all, that is a subjective claim, because it depends where you are. If you go to India, for example, you will see that it's not so unusual at all. In fact, it's very commonplace. But even if we take a society today, shall we say, for argument's sake, a Western society where such things are not, no one takes any note of these things, and no one worships statues of idols, well, that's also not necessarily so true. Some people certainly do. Certain sects of Christianity certainly do. But the fact is, these halachot are eternal and cannot be are not subject to such questions of is it common or is it not done nowadays? What do people how do people relate to such things nowadays? These are isurim min ha-Torah, something which would be an isur midivrei sofarim, maybe possibly you could begin to make that argument. But these are isurim min ha-Torah, and I do not think there's any room to suggest that today we should be more mekel with we can be mekel on such points. And I have not seen that argument made. With regards to visiting museums and the like, there not only is it mutar, it may also be a mitzvah to occasionally do such a thing in order to understand these halachot, to understand what was common, how things were done, what things looked like, what were Hazal referring to. You did not create these images. They're not in your home. You're not in charge of them. And yes, these forms of Avodah Zarah, Shemam Batal Mehem, they are no longer considered such to be items of worship. There it is mutar to go to a museum and see such things. And in fact, it may be informative.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Could you clarify what it means in the halakha when it says asur lahaniha or mutar lahaniha? Because it came to mind the Mishneh in Masechet Shabbat about like tying a cloak with a matbea before Shabbat. I was thinking perhaps if that matbea has some sort of tzara on it, that might potentially be an issue, if that's what it means, if that's what it's referring to.
Lahaniha means either to wear, this is what some of the Rishonim explain, or to simply have in your possession. It's in your drawer at home. That's lahaniha. Lahaniha is also to wear on your finger. That is how it's understood, as I recall, by the Rishonim. Let me just see something a moment. By the way, this halakha with the ring appears in the Tosefta, Masechet Avodah Zarah, and there are, as I recall, 3 shittot over there, and This is the psak that Rambam presents to us. Just 1 second. This Sugya appears in the Talmud Bavli, Masachet Avodah Zarah, Mem Gimel Amud Beth, and Rabbeinu Hananel, in his Perush on this Sugya, writes, I will now share it with you. I hope you can see it. It says here, Kluma, I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing. Can you see the Rabbeinu Hananel, the right-hand column, the smaller letters?
Yes.
All right, so he says, Tanya taba'ath shehotama bolet, asur lani haba isba'uh, umutal ahtomba, etc. So you see that the Rabbeinu Hananel understands it to refer to wearing one on one's finger. That's clear. As I understand, as I recall, most or all Rishonim hold this way. But it did occur to me when I was learning this sugya that lahanicha could also be understood to mean just to have in your possession, lahaniach, as opposed to having to get rid of it, to destroy it in some way or deface it. But we see that Rabbeinu Hananel understands it to mean specifically to wearing it on one's finger. You could say that the reason it is explained thus is because that's normally what you do with the ring. And therefore, laniha means you can do what people normally do with rings, and you wear it on your finger. But en hachenameh is true, equally true, that you could just keep it in your drawer at home as a piece of some nostalgic reason or what have you, without wearing it, and that could also qualify as laniha. All right, so we continue. This next halacha is also there's quite some discussion on this next halacha. Rambam's opinion is as follows. Halacha, where are we? First of all, we're at the end of the perek, and you should be able to see it in a moment. Halacha Yod Het, or Yod Aleph. וכן, אסור לצור דמות חמה ולבנה, כוכבים ומזלות ומלאכים. Here we're talking about drawing on a board, on a tablet, shall we say, on a blackboard with chalk, or a whiteboard with a pen, or what have you. וכן אסור לצור דמות חמה ולבנה, the image of the sun, moon, stars or planets or angels, שנאמר לא תעשון איתי. לא תעשון כדמות שמשים המשמשים לפני במרום. You may not form such images, even on two-dimensional images on a board. وَأَفِيلُ عَلَى اللُّوَحِ. There's a sugya in Rosh Hashanah and here in Avodah Zarah about Rabban Gamliel and the tavla that was used for purposes of Kiddush HaChodesh, etc. And there is quite some discussion about this halakha. Rambam's maskana is, as we see here, that it's asur. These specific items are not to be drawn even, or shall we say printed on some kind of a piece of cloth, a wall hanging, or something like that.
raises the question of whether a child is to be discouraged from drawing a picture of the sun, or anybody in terms of artwork, whether this is a halacha which should stop us from drawing any of these things at all, in any context.
All right. Well, I have thought about that as well, and it seems to me if you are drawing, painting a painting, a landscape, some beautiful panoramic view of a valley or the sea or the sun setting over the ocean or something like that, that is part of the that which appears to one's eyes when one views such a looks out over the sea or looks across the valley or something, or at night one sees the moon, etc. The stars. These are part of a great, within the context of a larger portrait or picture of something. I don't think that refers to that. Here we're talking about specifically the image of these items: the sun, the moon, the stars, planets. Where clearly the intention was to focus on that thing specifically, and usually these things were drawn alone. They were not. We're not talking about some kind of a painting which simply depicts the world of nature, the created world. That's my understanding. That's number one. Number two, Rambam in his Perush on the Mishnah, although there are many who disagree, Rambam in his Perush on the Mishnah writes that when Chazal speak about such things, they're not referring to a simple realistic image of that entity. So we're not talking simply about a drawing of something which represents the sun, or a drawing of something which represents a starry night with a nice moon somewhere in the picture. But rather, for example, a drawing which clearly is representing the sun. Perhaps I will read Rambam's Perush on the Mishnah to you. Something which is representing the sun, but it also has on it some kind of a human face as part of the image. Rambam says here as follows. This is in Perek Shalishi of Avodah Zarah, the Mishnah, Halacha Gimel, as it appears here at least. The Mishnah states, "Hamoseh kelim wa'alehem surath hama usurat levana usurat hajarakon, dragon, yolichem liyam hamelach." He who finds either clothing or vessels on which you have the image of the sun, moon, a dragon, etc., you have to dispose of them by throwing them into Yam HaMelach, some place where they cannot be retrieved. Rambam here states in his Perush on the Mishnah as follows: "En inyano sheyimsa igul v'yomar zo hashemesh." We're not speaking here of a simple circle which looks a bit like the sun, or very much like the sun, and the person who created it, or you who possess it, say this is an image of the sun, or hasi igul v'yomar zo yareach, or some kind of half moon image that looks like the moon, and this is a representation of the moon. That is not what is intended here, claims Rambam. Ela ba'aleh talasam or something like that, which is a talisman. In other words, those who believe in the power of these various images, etc. These people, miyahasim lakochavim suroth ad she'omerim ki surath shabtai surath zaken shahor muflag b'zikna. They have a specific version of that item, which is the image, which according to them has some power or can benefit you in some way, shall we say? In other words, in the case of Shabtai, that is to say, Saturn, it's not just an image of the planet, but rather it is an image of the planet with the face of an elderly man, an elderly man in the center of it, or something like that. With Surath Nora, or in the case of Venus, Surath Na'arayafa Aduyazaha, or an image of a young, beautiful girl dressed up with golden jewelry or something like that. But it's also recognizably connected to the planet Venus. In other words, these people who believe in it has to do with astrology and magic and sorcery and all kinds of things of that nature, these people do not just draw a picture of the sun, or the moon. They create an image which has on it a face of a certain type and a certain representation, which to their mind, to their way of thinking, according to their beliefs, this is of some value, some significance, but not simply as it were, a photograph of the physical entity, the item in question. And they don't all agree about these things. One says that the proper version of Jupiter is produced or represented in manner A, and the other one says no, that's not kasher. That's no lo yotzim yedei chova. You have to do it another. It has to look different. It has to have a horn on it. Who knows what it is? And it's all therefore. And the reason they disagree, Rambam says, because we're talking about things which are all false and misleading and based on nothing but their own imagination. And when something is based on lies or inventions that people produce from their own very active imaginations, then obviously you're going to have different opinions. Everyone's going to have their own version of how these things should work and how they should look. And therefore Rambam says, when it says in the Mishnah, the image of the sun or the moon, so it has to be not just an image of the sun, but an image of the sun according to at least one of these shitoth, of these people, these idolaters, these astrologers, these sorcerers, etc. If it's according to one of those shittot, then it's asur. But if it's just quite literally an image of the sun, then it doesn't count at all. So says Rambam. I recall that there are definitely those who disagree. If I'm not mistaken, Ba'al Hasdeh David, Hagon Rabbi David Pardo, in his Perush on the Tosefta, Hasdeh David, if I'm not mistaken, he disagrees. And if I'm not mistaken, the Abbas also disagrees. I think it's I believe it's in the Abbas's Perush on the Mishneh, Lehem Shamayim. He disagrees with Rambam on this, and Lichora, Rambam's claim is not at all obvious, and there is no clear proof of Rambam's interpretation in Chazal, in the Surya, in the Talmud. So I tend to agree with those other Chachamim that it does not apply only to such an image. So therefore, the halakha, when it comes to this, is as follows. According to Rambam, if a person buys some kind of wall hanging, some kind of printed sheet or cloth or what have you, which is designed to be hung on a wall, and it has a representation of the sun or the moon or some such thing. According to Rambam, if it is only an artistic representation of the sun or the moon, shall we say, without any human feature or anything that would indicate that it has to do with some form of Avodah Zarah or some such conception, then there's no Isur at all. But according to the other opinion that we just mentioned, any such item, even if it's only two-dimensional, would be Asur. Because, and the reason would logically be very obvious and simple, because there were certainly people, and there are today as well, who worship these celestial objects as they are, and they represent these objects in various forms in their artwork, in their jewelry, and what have you. They make simple representations of these items, and we see this today even in the world of Islam. The symbol of Islam, of course, is the crescent moon. It's not embellished in any way with any human form or anything else. It is, as we know, represents one of the particular gods that they worshipped in Arabia and the surrounding countries, and it remains to this day as a sign of. It became a sign of Islam, but it wasn't originally such. It wasn't such a sign. It did not represent Islam, of course, which didn't exist. It represented what it purports to represent, the moon, because they worshipped the moon, and that somehow managed to survive the destruction of the various idols, etc., in the pre-Islamic world. So, according to the other opinion, which I think is a much more reasonable opinion, any such image is asur. So, if a person has a wall hanging, and I mention a wall hanging because I've seen such things. Again, I'm not talking about a painting or a tapestry or something like that, which depicts some natural scene, which also includes the sun or the moon as part of the scene. But rather, let's say again, a wall hanging which has in its center a very large circular image which looks like the sun. It has rays emanating from it, and also has some kind of face on the sun, or it does not. So according to Rambam, it would only be a problem if it has such a face or something like that. And according to the other opinion, any such item would be asur. To have a Jew cannot have such a thing in their home, because such things were worshipped. So that's what Rambam says here again. So we read it again. V'chen asur l'asur damuth hama u'lbana kochavim u'mazalot u'malachim shenemar lo ta'asun iti lo ta'asun kidmuth shamashim hameshamashim lefanai b'marom, because these things are in the heavens above, and we know that Avodah Zarah worshipped celestial bodies, and just the item itself, the representation of such an item, when the focus and clearly the intention is that item specifically, that's a surah wafilu al halwa.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I think we have a lot of a realistic scenario that exists very often. People who even have a mild astronomical interest could put a picture of a picture of some scene in outer space, whether it's a picture of the moon, or some other celestial body, maybe Jupiter, Saturn.
I
I
understand, but I don't think any such thing would be a problem, because here we're talking here about creating an image, not photographing a reality. It's like photographing an animal. You can take a photograph of an animal. It's mutar to do so. Or take a photograph of a human being. It's mutar to do so. But is it mutar to create an image of a human being? It's asur to do so. The same, I think, applies here.
Three-dimensional image of a human being.
Yes. Exactly.
It's interesting. The one thing I wanted to mention is that I recall hearing that when the technology of taking pictures first came out, there were certain religious Jews who opposed the idea. Do you recall that?
I do recall something like that, yes.
I'm wondering why.
Well, I think you can understand why, but I also think it's mistaken. As we are saying, if you take a picture of you have a photograph of your grandparents on the wall, it's obvious why, and it's also it's not an image that you create. You're recording a reality, but you're not creating an image. Whereas when a person creates some kind of a mural, wall hanging, what have you, where the focus is at the center of this item is this large image of the sun with the rays and a face and what have you, as I've seen occasionally, then clearly the it's not just a photograph of the sun or a planet. It's what does it mean? I mean, who knows what it means? And maybe the people who produced it themselves have no idea to what they refer, and perhaps they do. There are all kinds of people out there in the world to this day with all kinds of ideas and all kinds of notions. And you have people who go out into the forest and hug trees and worship who knows what. And these things have never been eradicated from human societies altogether, and one imagines they will not be in the foreseeable future. But I do not think that photography is a problem, with the exception perhaps of shall we say, imagine that there was a certain Hasidic sect that very deliberately and very obviously takes a photograph of their leader and blows it up to very very large dimensions and place it on the wall of their Beth Knesset, shall we say, if you could imagine such a thing. I have seen such things. Is that simply a photograph to so that you know what this person, what his face looked like when he was alive, or is there some other intention beyond that involved in that photograph? Well, I think you can all understand and realize that it's not simply to remind you what a person looked like. It's not a passport photo. It's there for a very different reason. And to claim that there is an aspect of Avodah Zarah in such a practice, I think is not at all unreasonable. In fact, I think it would be difficult to argue that it's not so. Tov, let us continue and finish this perek. Surat ha-behemoth. Usha'a nefesh haya. Hus min hada. Everything we said to now referred to a human form. However, other types of any other living creatures that are represented, suroth, ilanoth, udasha'im, v'chayotze behem, mutar l'surotham, anything else which you wish to draw, to paint, is mutar, wa'afilu hayatha hasura bolethet, even if it is not just a painting, but it's even some kind of image which protrudes from the, if it's a canvas or some other, or like a some form of stucco, or the Romans, for example, had such things on their walls, and very wealthy people had on their walls paintings on the wall, and sometimes these paintings, the images were not flat, but they were actually protruded. They were plaster images that were on the wall. So if we're talking about animals, again, no question that Chazal had in mind what was common in the Roman world. And we know these things. We have examples of these things in museums, and not just in museums. I've seen such things in places like the Herodion, or Herod's palace, and there are houses that have been excavated in the Atika, in the old city in Yerushalayim, where you can see these types of decorations on the wall. So these other items, if it's animals, what have you, it's not, and even if they are bolet, even if they protrude, they are not asur, because these things were not normally associated with Avodah Zarah. It was almost always a human form, face, that was worshipped in some way, also to which some kind of significance was attached. So,
Rabbi,
yes.
would something like a textured tapestry count as a tzura boleteth, or would that be flat? Because unless you're standing very close to it, you think it's flat.
What is a textured tapestry?
I'm not sure, but I've seen a few that if you stand very close to them, you see that the different colors have different layers on them. So
something that's, for instance, embroidered?
Yeah, but I guess a little bit more.
Something embroidered, technically it does protrude, but by such a infinitesimal amount that I don't think that's what was included or conceived of in the term bolet. I think that's what Rambam referred to earlier about a rir that's merukam, some kind of what was Rambam's language earlier? Or suroth sherokamim ba'arir. You see, Rambam says in Hilchot Zayin. You see that? Let me show you again. Over here, Rambam says suroth sherokamim ba'arir. So he was talking about embroidery on a piece of cloth, on material. That's mutar, Rambam says. So that you see that's not considered bolet. So if it's bolet to that extent, it's not bolet. It's not protruding. It's not truly a three-dimensional image. But if it is something which is obviously three-dimensional, then it's asur. And I'm not sure I know what a textured tapestry is. There might be different types. There may be different thicknesses. I'm not really familiar with such things. But embroidery, I know what that is. I've seen it. I know what it looks like, and I know that it's essentially two-dimensional, and it counts therefore as two-dimensional. Tov, we shall end here for today. Ayu beruchim, hizku v'yames levavchem kol hamiyachalim l'Adonai shalom u'nisachot.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.